to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Eli Savit is trying to reshape how justice works in Michigan, starting with what happens inside a prosecutor's office. As Washtenaw County's top prosecutor, he ended cash bail for most cases, declined to charge some low-level drug offenses, and launched a transparency effort to track racial disparities in prosecution. Now, supporters of progressive prosecutors like Savit say they're helping to fix a broken system. Critics say they're putting public safety at risk. Now, we'll see what kind of appetite Michigan has for this approach. That's because Savit is running to be Michigan's next attorney general. So can his model of reform scale? And is Michigan ready for it? Eli Savit joins us now to talk about what kind of justice he believes Michigan needs next. Prosecutor Savit, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And we should note the other candidates so far include Democrat Mark Totten and Republican Kevin Kajewski. Michigan's current AG, Dana Nessel, is term limited and can't run for re-election. So, Prosecutor Savit, you just launched your campaign for Michigan Attorney General. I'm wondering what made you decide to take this step, and what do you believe this office needs right now that you can bring?
Well, fundamentally, I think that the people of the state of Michigan need an attorney general who is going to stand up and fight for them, even when there are very powerful interests on the other side. That is something that I have done throughout my career. You know, even before I was the prosecuting attorney for Washtenaw County, I led the city of Detroit's litigation against the opioid industry for the damages they've caused to our community. I have litigated environmental rights lawsuits, suing corporate polluters like Shell and Exxon and DuPont for PFAS contamination. I've done civil rights work. And right now, we are seeing our rights under attack, both from the federal government in Washington, D.C., but also closer to home. And fundamentally, I think what Michigan deserves in an attorney general is somebody who's going to stand up for the people, regardless of how powerful the interests are on the other side. Whether that's, a slumlord that is taking advantage of tenants, whether it's a business that is ripping off workers, whether it's a corporate polluter, or whether it is Donald Trump himself seeking to rewrite the Constitution and eviscerate our fundamental rights, the AG needs to be there to stand up for the people, and that's the type of AG I will be.
You've outlined so far a pretty dynamic law career, Prosecutor Savit, but I want to go back to before law, when you were a public school teacher.
Yep.
I'm wondering what you saw in that role, especially in underserved schools, that shaped your understanding of justice and public service before you became a litigator, before you got into the courtroom.
Yeah, and I guess how much time do we have here, right? Because
not enough.
not enough at all. I'll talk first about the intersection between my time in the classroom and my perspective on justice. I had kids in my classes who were justice involved, and more frequently whose parents were justice involved, people whose parents had gone to jail or to prison. And I saw how that affected the kids and the families, right? If you don't have a parent at home, if a parent's locked up, then it really creates intergenerational cascading effects. There's trauma that the kid is experiencing. Sometimes you simply don't have a parent to get you out of bed in the morning, and you might have chronic absenteeism, and you fall further and further behind. So I saw that, and look, of course, I am a prosecutor, right? There are people that need to be separated from the community for public safety's sake, but we should be trying to avoid that wherever we can do that consistent with public safety, because it really does have profound impacts on families. The other thing that I saw is, I taught both general education and special education classes. And one of the things I am so concerned about right now is the attempted federal dismantling of the Department of Education and programs for special education students. I had special ed students who were bright and inquisitive and needed the accommodations that they're entitled to under federal law. But with the federal government stepping back and attempting to dismantle the Department of Education, we're not going to get enforcement of some of those laws, and we're going to see a lot of students that get left behind who should have a fair opportunity to succeed and to thrive.
You're echoing concerns that we've heard on this show from many education advocates. But I do want to go back to something else that you mentioned, and that is that even as a progressive prosecutor, that you need to separate people from the public for the public's safety sometimes. What are those instances? And what are the ways that we should be rehabilitating those folks so that they can re-enter society successfully?
It's a great question. And look, every case is different. But certainly if you pick up a gun, you shoot it at somebody, right? You've demonstrated that you are a threat to public safety. If you're somebody that commits a sexual assault, if you're preying on minors, the crimes that really keep people up at night, any prosecutor, including more progressive ones, are going to take those seriously. But you mentioned reentry, and I think it's really important to pause and talk about this because even when we send people to prison and the justice system sends people to prison, 90+% of those folks are going to be coming home, right? They're going to be released. Very few people serve life sentences either in the state of Michigan or in the country as a whole. And public safety really dictates that we should have robust reentry services. While folks are behind bars, we need to give them opportunities to continue their education, to be trained up to enter the workforce. And then the other thing is when they come home, especially if you've served a relatively lengthy sentence, 5, 10, 20 years, there needs to be support for those returning citizens, including peer mentorship, because if you think about how much the world has changed in the last 15 or 20 years, I've talked to people that have come home recently and they said, I didn't know how to pump gas because everything's with a credit card right now. And I feel ashamed. I feel out of place. And that can exacerbate that trauma. So it's really important to have peer mentorship, to have folks that are there to meet them, to support them when they come home. I will say in Washtenaw County, and I want to shout out some organizations that are doing that, like A Brighter Way, like Washtenaw Literacy, We the People, Opportunity Farms, folks that we have partnered with. But we need more resources for those services. And this is true not just as a matter of fairness, because once somebody's served their time, I believe they should have an opportunity to thrive and contribute to our community, but also for public safety. Because if you get reentry right, it's very unlikely somebody's going to reoffend. The most likely time that somebody that's released from jail or prison is to reoffend is during those first 6 months that they are home, which really highlights the need for robust reentry services as well as the opportunity for workforce development, education while they are behind bars so they can have a job, they can have housing, they can have a stable life when they do come home.
Prosecutor Savit, I want to zoom in on your reforms because you have led some progressive reforms. What have crime rates been doing in Washtenaw County since you became prosecutor there?
Well, I can tell you, last year we saw a more than 50% reduction in firearm deaths in Washtenaw County, more than 57% reduction in homicides. Like every community across the country, there was a spike in Washtenaw County around the COVID-19 pandemic. That's true in jurisdictions where you had more traditional prosecutors, where you had reform-oriented prosecutors. But we've seen a significant decline in part due to the efforts of community violence interruption programs, organizations in the community that intervene and stop somebody from pulling the trigger before something ever happens, which should be our goal. But the other thing I want to highlight about Washtenaw County is we've implemented some diversion programs where when people are accused of lower level offenses, we don't necessarily need to saddle them with a criminal record. And so we have the only pre-plea diversion program in the entire state where before somebody even pleads guilty to a crime, if what they need is treatment, they need help, they need to do some community service, whatever we would demand that they do to take accountability and get back on the right track if they were convicted of a crime, we give them the opportunity to do that before they enter a plea, before anything's on their record. And you got to stay out of trouble. You got to complete the program. But if you do that, all charges are dismissed, and you never even have to say you pled guilty to a crime. You want to know what the recidivism rate for people that successfully complete that program is?
Please.
It is literally 0%, according to an independent study that was done of it. And we've had a couple hundred people go through this program right now, and you can't do better than 0%. I want to break that down. What that means is not a single person that has successfully completed that program has been rearrested within a 6-month time frame. That was the focus of the study.
Prosecutor Savit, I'm wondering if you have gotten interest from other counties in the state to mirror what you're doing with this pre-plead program.
We have. You know, I talk to other prosecutors and they see what we're doing and they're interested in seeing how it works. I will say that these programs require partnership, not just the prosecutor's office, but with the courts. The judge has to agree to sort of hold the case and allow them to take this off-ramp and then just come back in 6 months and it's dismissed. We got great judges in Washtenaw County. We've got to partner with probation that will, oversee whether somebody is doing what they've been asked to do. And of course, the defense bar has to trust the prosecutor's office and the court enough to recommend that their clients go through these programs. So it really is a team effort. We're lucky in Washtenaw County to have many actors that are working from the same playbook, but it has been phenomenally successful, and it just demonstrates that we don't have to saddle somebody with a criminal conviction if they've taken accountability, they've done what we've asked them to do, and can move on with their life without having an adverse impact on jobs or housing or employment or educational opportunities. We've done our job and we've kept the community safer.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the race for Michigan Attorney General. Our guest is Washtenaw County Prosecutor Eli Savit, who just announced his run for the position. Now, as you talk about your philosophy as a prosecutor and you talk about things like restorative justice, I can't help but think back to some of your experience clerking for Supreme Court justices, Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Mm-hmm. They had very different judicial philosophies. I wonder if you could talk very briefly about those experiences. How did they shape your legal values?
Sure. And I was tremendously honored to work for both justices. Justice O'Connor was retired from the bench by the time I worked for her. And, I was the clerk that was assigned to help her out with speeches, and she did law review articles. But she was somebody who was very, very practical. And she really cared how the law was perceived. She believed that justice must satisfy the appearance of justice, and if the decisions of the Supreme Court lacked legitimacy in the public mind, one of her big philosophies was it lacked legitimacy at all. And I think that's an important lesson to bear in mind. What struck me about Justice Ginsburg, who is somebody that I was tremendously fortunate to learn from, is just how much she kept the human beings front and center whenever she was thinking about a case. I remember one night I was working with her on a case, and she was a night owl. She would stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning if she was working on something. And if you were clerking for her and you were working with her on that, you were staying in the building with her. So it was one of those nights we were the only two left in the building. And she was working on a case that I was working on her with, and a different case that one of my co-clerks was assigned to work on with her. I came in late at night and I brought her the memo that she had asked for. And she had been thinking about this other case, which wasn't even my case, again. Is a case that very few people have ever heard of. It was an immigration case, actually, and it involved a man who was about to be deported. And she just took my memo, she put it down, she said, "Thank you." And she started talking to me for 45 minutes, nonstop, about that man who was facing deportation, who was at the center of that case, how unfair it was, how it was going to impact his life and his family. We weren't even talking about the legal doctrines or what the statute said. She was thinking about the human being. And she never forgot that the law is about human beings and the law impacts human beings. And she had been an appellate judge and Supreme Court justice for decades at that point. But it's something that we need to always bear in mind. The people that come into our judicial system, whether it's in the criminal system or a landlord-tenant case or a family case or a major civil rights case that grabs headlines. For the litigants that are in that case, many times that is going to be the most important thing that happens in their life. RBG never forgot that, and that's something I've tried to carry with me throughout my career.
Before I let you go, Prosecutor Savit, I want to stay on this notion of the human impacts that are felt from the criminal justice system. If you're elected Attorney General, how will Michigan's justice system look different 4 years from now? What change would you want people to be able to feel in their daily lives? And again, we only have 1 minute to answer this.
One of the things, and I'm glad you brought up people feeling change in their daily lives. One of the things that I'm firmly committed to doing is working around the state and listening to local communities to see how we can address the issues that are closest to home. I can talk all day about the Trump administration and pushing back against the attempts to cut back on our constitutional rights, and I think that's tremendously important. But I also recognize that folks may be dealing with a situation in which there's a local slumlord who is taking advantage of tenants, and you got children living in dilapidated housing conditions. You may have a local polluter that is impacting the water supply and a local stream. You may have a shady business that is ripping off residents. And all of those are things that the Attorney General is well situated to stand up and intervene in, and something I would be committed to doing. I'm running to be the people's lawyer, right? And being the people's lawyer requires listening to people, listening to the concerns in their community, and when there is an ability to take legal action to address it, we will do it. So that's the kind of Attorney General I'll be. And in 4 years, I hope people will know that they'll have somebody fighting on their side, no matter what the pressing issues for them or for the community might be.
Eli Savit, Washtenaw County prosecutor and candidate for Michigan Attorney General. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up in just about 7 minutes, Detroit's own Jalen Rose will be joining us to discuss growing up here, his focus on educational equity, and an event that he'll be speaking at here in Detroit. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. Stay with us.